Hey everyone, it's been a busy time, so I apologize for the delay in videos. This episode is basically a collection of random topics that I've been thinking about for the last few months. Be sure to check out Sam's guest article for Wolfram, where he gives more detail about the solution and the tools he used to help find it. The link is in the description. And check out the previous episode for the talk he gave for Macquarie University in Australia. For you programmers out there, all the Zodiac cipher crypto tools I built over the years are now publicly available on GitHub. It's a huge mess, but I hope to make it more organized and useful over time. There's a lot of stuff in there: the web toy, cryptoscope, Cipher Explorer, the Zodiac typewriter, and a bunch of other miscellaneous tools and documents. The link is in the video description. Several people have pointed out some of Zodiac's letters that have similar wording to the message from the 340. The 340 solution starts with, "I hope you are having lots of fun and trying to catch me." The letter he sent later with his next cipher says, "I hope you do not think that I was the one who wiped out that blue meanie." On another page of the same letter, he even repeats, "I hope you have fun trying to figure out who I killed." A card he mailed 8 days later includes the threat, "I hope you enjoy yourselves when I have my blast." It's interesting how he repeats this similar wording. Some people speculate these might be subtle clues he was giving to help solve the 340. Or, at a minimum, this is part of his writing style, and so this wording should have been tried as a partial guess in solving the cipher. Another subtle clue might be that he didn't start writing diagonally on the envelopes until he mailed his 340 cipher. He mailed 3 envelopes in a row with similarly diagonal writing. We now know the 340 is decoded using a diagonal scheme, so maybe Zodiac was giving a small hint. A contributor named Craigle on the Zodiac forums pointed out an article published after Zodiac sent his first cipher, the 408, and before it was solved. It reported a young graduate student who claimed to be making progress decrypting the ciphers. He said, "The pattern beginning to take shape apparently will end up a 3-tiered diagonal structure composed of sections." That sounds familiar to what the 340 ended up being. 3 sections, with 2 of them having diagonal messages. Was this just a coincidence? Or was Zodiac inspired by the student's idea? Or should the student's statement raise our suspicions? Many of us have wondered, how close did other people get to the correct solution over the years? The closest I know about is Jarl, who correctly guessed most of the transpositions 7 months before we all found the full solution. But back then, he didn't recover the plain text, I think partly because of the disruptions in the second section and the horizontal transpositions going on in the last 2 lines. A person going by Israelite Wolfman on Mike Morford's Zodiac forum claimed the last word of the 340 would be paradise. Well, he wasn't too far off, it was the second to last word. Or he's right on the money if you move death up here to make life is death, which makes the message more sensible. Then paradise really is the last word. Corey Starlipper, whose wrong solution went viral 10 years ago, had the phrase gas chamber in it, just like the real solution does. So he made a lucky guess on that, even though his solution is wrong and the phrase is in the wrong spot. Back in 2009, FBI Crypto Unit Chief Dan Olson said he thought the cipher needed to be split into 2 equal parts. That's fairly close to the correct split. I've gotten thousands of solution proposals over the years, and I'm not aware of any other close matches. If you know of any, please let me know. I've been paying another visit to the various patterns and clues in the 340, wondering which ones were real, useful clues, and which ones were just noise or wild goose chases. In episode 2, we looked at repeating bigrams, especially the so-called period 19 bigrams. Those period 19 bigrams really stood out compared to the normal ones. Turns out, those were probably the most important clues because they made a lot of people think that some kind of transposition was going on. For instance, there are 4 of these pairs of backwards P and plus sign. They look like this in the untransposed cipher, and when you apply the substitution key, you can see that they all stand for CH, which appears in the words catch, witch, chamber, and reach. Here's another pair that repeats 3 times, the circle with vertical line and plus sign. Here's what they look like in the untransposed cipher. And after applying the key, they stand for TH, which is a very common bigram in English. These ones appear in the words the, nothing, and death. So some of the other noteworthy repeating patterns, like the repeating FB backwards C and the I filled circle F, turned out to be false clues. In a normal substitution cipher, these would have been hints about repeating patterns in the underlying secret message. But in the 340, They just happened to come together after Zodiac transposed his plaintext. For example, decoding the 340 gives this transposed message. The repeating trigrams we saw in the cipher correspond to these repeating patterns in the plaintext. FEE for the FB and backwards C, and EVF for the I filled circle and F. But when you unfold the transposed message to get the original, those letters are all split up. The repeating trigrams in the 340 probably just appeared by chance. Or maybe Zodiac noticed them in his transposed message and decided to try to fool people by assigning symbols to make those patterns more obvious. Was he really that diabolical, tricking codebreakers with such a false clue? Well, he was dedicated enough to make a hard cipher by using transposition and multiple sections, so I could see him doing that. Realizing that he used transposition wasn't enough to crack the cipher because it had to be split into 3 sections. So it was almost due to desperation that the cipher got solved, because so many other attempts to crack it were failing. Some of us decided, what the hell, let's split it up into pieces and see what happens. Was there any clue that the cipher had multiple sections? His first cipher, the 408, was mailed in 3 pieces. And maybe these hyphens in the 340 really are a hint about the sections in this cipher. They look like fold marks right in the middle of the cipher, and they are exactly at the top of what turned out to be the second section. Here's what it looks like when we apply the substitution key to all the sections. The key says the hyphens decode to S's. Did Zodiac see that this line began and ended with an S and decide to mark it with hyphens? It's an interesting theory, but we don't have a way to prove it. Another pattern that caught the attention of codebreakers are these repeating L-shaped patterns, sometimes called pivots. They are made up of repeating trigrams going in different directions, but meeting together at a common symbol. This one has R, J, and I repeating horizontally and vertically. And this one has backwards B, dot, and backwards C also repeating horizontally and vertically. In my other videos and presentations, I talked a lot about these patterns because they're very unusual and rarely appear naturally when making normal substitution ciphers. I've always believed that they were possibly some sign of a transposition scheme. Well, Zodiac did use a transposition scheme, but apparently it has nothing to do with these patterns. I've made thousands of test ciphers that use the same kind of transposition Zodiac used, and those kinds of patterns do not seem to appear more often just because of that scheme. Let's decode the symbols in those patterns. When you apply the substitution key to the 340, you get this transposed plaintext. The cipher patterns show up because of these repeating patterns in the plaintext. You can see O, S, and E repeating in the one on the left, and E, N, and E repeating in the one on the right. But when you unfold the message to get the original, those letters are spread out. There's not really a pattern to it, so maybe they are just appearing by chance. But when Zodiac assigned his symbols, there was only a rather small chance of preserving those patterns, because he had multiple choices for each letter. For example, he had 4 symbols to pick from for the 2 O's, but picked R for both of them. He had 4 symbols for the S's, but picked J for both, and 6 symbols for the E's, but picked I. There's a similar story for the second pivot. He picked the backwards B for both of these E's, then the dot for both of these N's, and the backwards C for both of these E's. If he was assigning symbols completely randomly for both patterns, there was only about a 1 in 17,000 chance of accidentally preserving both of those patterns. So it's possible he saw those patterns and tried to preserve them on purpose, so they'd show up in his final cipher and confuse codebreakers. Well, I can't really prove it one way or another, but one thing's certain. It definitely confused me and many others for a very long time. A sort of related type of pattern are these, which resemble box corners. They are like smaller versions of the repeating backwards L or pivot patterns. They correspond to these repeating groups of A, S, and E in the transposed message. Unfolding the message splits them up, just like the other patterns, so maybe they too are just showing up completely by chance. Or maybe Zodiac noticed them and decided to highlight them. What makes those patterns a bit more interesting to me is the fact that these other symbols, the O and C, repeat in the same positions for each corner. Here's how they look in the decoded message, and after unfolding the message. Are these patterns also just coming up completely by chance, or did Zodiac highlight them? I wonder if we would ever be able to find out. There is still another big mystery about this cipher. How did he assign the symbols from his key to his message? We know the key he used to hide his message, but we don't know how he made it or how he decided which symbol to use for letters that have more than one symbol to pick from. Here's the key for his first cipher, the 408. When he assigned symbols for a letter, he often used a simple system. For example, his key has these symbols standing for the letter E. Here's his full message, and all the E's. After encrypting the message, the E's show up like this. If you read through them in order, they make these repeating patterns. It's because he's cycling through the symbols in his key. In the 340, there's some evidence of that kind of cycling, but it is very weak. There are no long patterns of sequences that are as strong as the ones in the 408. There are only some shorter ones, like these. And the patterns don't become stronger if we look at the untransposed version of the cipher. So did he use some method, or was he just picking symbols randomly? I wonder if he knew codebreakers would have looked for those patterns, and so tried to make his assignments less predictable. There are some interesting things we know about Zodiac's symbol assignments. First, he tried very hard to avoid repeating symbols along row-sized chunks. Jarl discovered these 26 row-sized chunks that have 0 repeating symbols in them. If Zodiac was assigning symbols more randomly, there would have been far fewer of those chunks. So it's like he was trying really hard to avoid repeating symbols within that row-sized window. The second thing we know is that there is a group of symbols that seem to avoid this middle section. Consider all of these symbols. Let's highlight everywhere they are found in the ciphertext. Isn't it strange how they avoid that middle section? You can't find any of these symbols there. Why do they do that? Sam had an idea that maybe Zodiac was encoding from the top and bottom at the same time and purposefully changed up the scheme for that middle section. Even in the untransposed version of the cipher, there's another set of symbols missing from the same middle section. Why? Is this by accident, or does it reflect the method Zodiac used to make his substitution key? This could be worth further study. All of these strange things about the 340 remind me of how lucky we were to solve it. Zodiac came up with such a strange scheme, either from his own imagination or from learning about something similar somewhere. There was no way to solve this unknown cipher without figuring out the scheme. All the way back in 1939, cryptographer Helen Fouche Gaines wrote about this problem in her book about cryptanalysis. She had a chapter called Investigating the Unknown Cipher, with some tips about how to go about it. She said, "If the cryptogram has come from an amateur inventor, it may be a case of digging into one's memory for previous inventions." Well, we tried this for Zodiac, and his previous invention was a cipher mailed in 3 parts and ended up being a simple substitution cipher. Gaines goes on to say, "With this last case, however, the inventor very often fails to submit material in proportion to the amount of complication he has introduced." That seems to match the situation we faced with Zodiac's 340 cipher, despite some things that could be interpreted as clues, such as the diagonal writing and some wording that ended up being in the solution. Zodiac simply did not give up specifics about his method, as far as we know. So the mystery went unsolved for 51 years. So even though we know the solution to the 340, it still holds some mysteries for us. How did Zodiac create his substitution key? Did he force interesting patterns to appear to make codebreakers waste their time chasing false leads? Some of these questions might be worth further study, and I hope they get explored. Perhaps answering these questions might give us insights into how he might have created his remaining 2 unsolved ciphers, or reveal some new discovery about the 340. What are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments if you have any ideas, questions, or suggestions. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh, and keep working on those last 2 unsolved Zodiac ciphers. Good luck!